Today, we're going to dive into everything about Winston Churchill. Hope you enjoy. When we think of Winston Churchill, we tend to picture the old man. The cigar, the Homburg hat, the heavy wool coat, and the defiant V for victory sign. We see the stone monument of 1940, but monuments don't just appear. They are forged, broken, and remade. And to understand the man who stood alone against Hitler, you have to meet the boy who felt entirely alone in the world. He was born into the very apex of British aristocracy, right here at Blenheim Palace in 1874. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, was a political shooting star. His mother, Jenny Jerome, a brilliant American heiress. By all accounts, Winston had everything, except the one thing a child actually needs: attention. His parents practically ignored him. Letters from young Winston at boarding school are heartbreaking. He begged them to visit. They rarely did. He failed his entrance exams for the military academy twice before finally getting in. His father openly expressed disappointment, calling him unsuited for public life. When Lord Randolph died young, he left behind a son with two things: a profound sense of inferiority and a desperate, burning urgency to prove his dead father wrong. Winston realized early on that if the world wasn't going to hand him fame, he would have to go out and conquer it. He became a soldier, yes, but more importantly, he became a war correspondent. He wanted to be where the bullets were flying, and he wanted everyone back in London to read about it. Cuba, the northwest frontier of India, the Sudan, where he took part in one of the last classic cavalry charges of the British Army at the Battle of Omdurman. He wasn't just observing history, he was actively auditioning for it. But the real turning point? 1899, the Boer War in South Africa. Churchill's armored train was ambushed. Instead of hiding, he took command of the clearing operations, got captured, and was thrown into a prisoner of war camp. Most men would wait out the war. Not Winston. He climbed over a latrine wall, slipped past guards, and traveled 300 miles through enemy territory with nothing but some chocolate and a few banknotes in his pocket. When he made it back to British lines, he wasn't just a young man anymore. He was a national hero. He was 26 years old, he had just won a seat in Parliament, and the 20th century was waiting for him. Entering Parliament in 1901, Churchill was a Tory, a conservative like his father. But Winston didn't fit neatly into boxes. He was too restless, too loud, and honestly too ambitious. Within 3 years, he did the unthinkable in British politics. He crossed the floor. He left the Conservatives and joined the Liberals. To his old friends, he was a traitor. To his new friends, he was a dangerous mercenary. But look at what he did next, because it surprises people who only know him as a wartime conservative. Alongside David Lloyd George, Churchill became one of the architects of the modern British welfare state. He introduced the first minimum wage laws, created labor exchanges for the unemployed, and fought for prison reform. He had this deep, paternalistic belief that the British Empire couldn't be great abroad if its people were starving at home. Then came 1914. The world caught fire. As First Lord of the Admiralty, Churchill was in charge of the world's most powerful navy. He loved it. He modernized the fleet, shifting it from coal to oil. But the First World War quickly ground into a horrific, stagnant slaughter in the trenches of France. Churchill hated stagnation. He wanted a bold stroke to break the deadlock. He looked at the map and saw the Dardanelles, the gateway to the Ottoman Empire. His plan was audacious: launch a naval and amphibious assault at Gallipoli, knock the Turks out of the war, and open a sea route to Russia. On paper, it was brilliant. In reality, it was an unmitigated catastrophe. The execution was flawed, the commanders were hesitant, and the Turkish resistance was ferocious. The beaches turned into a meat grinder. Over 100,000 Allied soldiers were killed or wounded, and as the disaster unfolded, the blame fell squarely on one man: Winston Churchill. He was stripped of his power. He was humiliated, despised by the public, and sunk into what he called his black dog, a deep, paralyzing depression. But watch what he does here. Instead of hiding in a country estate, he goes to the front lines. At age 41, the former cabinet minister volunteers to command an infantry battalion in the frozen, muddy trenches of the Western Front. He faces death daily, seeking a strange kind of redemption in the mud. He survived, but the scar of Gallipoli would chase him for the rest of his life. The 1920s and 30s are what historians call Churchill's wilderness years, and honestly, for a long time, it looked like his story was over. He rejoined the Conservative Party, joking that anyone can rat, but it takes a certain ingenuity to re-rat. He became Chancellor of the Exchequer, but his decision to return Britain to the gold standard was an economic disaster that led to massive strikes and unemployment. By the time the 1930s rolled around, Churchill was politically isolated. He was seen as an outdated relic of the Victorian era. He opposed self-rule for India, which made him look reactionary. He supported the king during the abdication crisis, which alienated the public. He retreated to his country home, Chartwell, spending his days painting landscapes, building brick walls with his own hands, and writing massive volumes of history. But while the rest of Britain was trying to forget the horrors of the Great War, Churchill was watching the horizon. In 1933, a man named Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany. The prevailing mood in Britain was appeasement. Never again, the people said. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain believed you could negotiate with Hitler, that you could give him pieces of Europe to satisfy his appetite. Churchill saw right through it. From his lonely seat in Parliament, year after year, he sounded the alarm. He used his own private intelligence network to gather data on German rearmament. He stood up in the House of Commons and warned that Germany was building a massive air force, that Hitler was a fanatic who could not be appeased, and that a second, even more terrible war was coming. They called him a warmonger. They called him obsessed. They laughed at him. But then came 1938, Munich. Chamberlain came back waving a piece of paper, promising peace for our time. Churchill stood up in a hostile parliament and said, "You were given the choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor, and you will have war." Within a year, German tanks rolled into Poland. The illusion shattered. The wilderness years were over. The prophet was right. On May 10, 1940, the exact day Hitler launched his blitzkrieg against France and the Low Countries, Winston Churchill finally became Prime Minister. He was 65 years old. He later wrote that he felt as if he were walking with destiny, and that all his past life had been a mere preparation for this hour. And what an hour it was. Within weeks, France collapsed. The British Army was miraculously evacuated from the beaches of Dunkirk, but they left all their heavy weapons behind. Britain stood entirely alone. The Soviet Union had a non-aggression pact with Hitler. The United States was fiercely isolationist. Hitler expected Britain to surrender, to sign a peace treaty. Most of the British establishment wanted to negotiate. Behind closed doors in May 1940, Churchill fought a desperate internal war against his own cabinet to keep Britain in the fight. If he had lost that political debate, the history of the world would have changed forever. Nazi Germany would have consolidated control over Europe entirely. But Churchill didn't just win the debate in the cabinet. He won the hearts of the British people. How? With words. Edward R. Murrow, the American journalist, said it best. Churchill mobilized the English language and sent it into battle. He didn't promise victory. He promised blood, toil, tears, and sweat. He gave a terrified nation something to hold on to. Courage. Then came the Blitz. For months, London and other major cities were bombed night after night. Churchill didn't hide in a bunker. He walked through the smoking ruins, weeping with the citizens, kicking the rubble and looking up at the sky in defiance. But leadership in total war isn't just about inspiring speeches. It's about brutal, agonizing choices. Churchill ordered the attack on the French fleet at Mers el-Kébir, killing over 1,000 French sailors just to ensure those ships wouldn't fall into Nazi hands. He authorized the area bombing of German cities like Dresden, turning civilian centers into firestorms. He managed the temperamental alliance with Franklin Roosevelt and the deeply suspicious Joseph Stalin. He worked 18-hour days, conducting meetings from his bath, drinking champagne and brandy, fueling a manic energy that kept the machinery of the British Empire running until the tide finally turned. From El Alamein to D-Day, from the dark abyss of 1940 to the glorious relief of VE Day in May 1945, Winston Churchill had led his country through the valley of the shadow of death. In July 1945, just weeks after Germany surrendered, Great Britain held a general election. Churchill was convinced he would win a landslide. He was, after all, the savior of the nation. The result was a stunning, crushing defeat. The British people loved Churchill, the war leader, but they were exhausted. They didn't want to return to the 1930s. They wanted health care, housing, and social reform. They voted him out of office before the war with Japan was even fully finished. His wife, Clementine, tried to comfort him, saying, "Maybe it's a blessing in disguise." Churchill grunted back, "Right now, it remains quite effectively disguised. But once again, the story doesn't end where you think it does." In 1946, as a private citizen visiting Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, Churchill delivered another speech that would define the next half-century. With Harry Truman sitting right behind him, he uttered the words, "From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. The Cold War had begun, and it was Churchill who gave it its name." Against all odds, he returned as Prime Minister in 1951 at the age of 76. He spent his second term trying to broker a peace summit between the U.S. and the Soviet Union to prevent a nuclear apocalypse. He was aging, suffering from silent strokes, but his mind remained fixed on the global chessboard. In 1953, he received two of the highest honors a human can achieve. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II, and he won the Nobel Prize in Literature. When he finally passed away in January 1965 at the age of 90, it felt like an entire epoch had ended. His state funeral was the largest the world had ever seen. Hundreds of thousands of people lined the streets of London in total silence. As his coffin was carried down the River Thames on a small boat, the dock cranes along the river, operated by working-class men who had voted him out in 1945, were lowered in a spontaneous, silent salute. Winston Churchill was a deeply flawed man. He made colossal military blunders. His views on race and empire were outdated even in his own time. He could be arrogant, stubborn, and impossibly difficult. But in the darkest moment of the 20th century, when freedom itself was on the line, his flaws, his stubbornness, his absolute refusal to compromise with evil, his historical romanticism, were exactly what the world needed to survive. He didn't just live through history. He dragged the world along with him. That's all from Mango. Thanks for watching. Bye.